or whatever bullshit for like an hour. But I've just been waking up early, and I think part of that is I changed my life schedule around a little bit so that I stopped working by 9 at the latest,
Mm-hmm.
and then would give myself a few hours of just like tooling around, playing like video games or watching anime with my partner, and that like always having like that several hour gap has pretty much like trained my brain at this point to start conking out around 10 or 11. So it's like that's when it's sleepy time, and I sleep a long time. Like I'll like 8 hours seems to be my minimum.
Mm.
So by going to bed so early, that kind of like rejiggers it to wake up at like at a more appropriate time. Also, I tend to fall asleep on the couch a lot, so I just have to plan around that
Dude,
instead of trying
couches
to.
are so comfortable. Like
Bro.
sleeping on
How
a couch
dare
is
they?
so nice.
Yeah, I think our couch might be starting to age a little bit though, because I can start to feel the wood underneath. It's like this couch we've had it since like I want to say 2013 or something. Like when we moved into our second place. So this is when yeah, it probably was like 2013, 2014. We moved into a new place and we got this couch, and the couch has like a memory foam interior or whatever, but they say, oh yeah, that'll last you forever, but eventually it gets worn down too. You sit on that thing enough. So I don't know, at some point it might be a good idea to replace that couch, but it's not yet at the point where it's like totally uncomfortable, at least.
We
Let
had
alone
our
20 hours in
couch
bed.
for like
Yeah.
20 years before we actually replaced it. 20 years.
Yeah.
Cats, dogs,
There
rodents.
she is.
Hey, Ash, would you do me a favor and get your Conyers in case they start shouting?
Sure.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
So,
We're like me and Ash are roommates, and also Ashley are roommates, but Ashley's with is quarantining with her family right now. So
yes.
Okay, okay.
yeah, yeah.
There's too many
Yeah.
Ashleys in the equation.
I know
Yeah,
it's
I'm cool with you
difficult.
guys referring to me as Kilo to make it simpler.
Yeah,
Kilo. Alright.
that's how the internet knows you anyway.
Yes.
Right. Hey Ash. Hey Mr. Wiggles. Good puppo.
I can't get over how fucking fast I like saw my phone, saw that it was like 4:27, and just fucking jumped.
It was at this moment he knew he fucked up.
It was.
So I was told you overslept through 2 meetings. How did you manage to smooth that over?
Oh, what for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was fine. It was like I was worried it was like a bad impression. They didn't give a shit though. It was mostly just this client that
Thank you, Ash.
wanted me to record some sample lines for something for a project they were starting up or whatever,
Mm.
for a pitch, and I was like, hey, I'm so sorry, my sleep schedule is so fucked, and I'm out of touch with the rest of the world. And they're like, no worries, I get it.
Quarantine got
Basically
people
everybody,
hitting a
right?
little bit different.
It certainly do.
Mm-hmm. It's
I
really
mean,
weird.
that's not to say that it's different than how it usually is for me anyway. This is normal. But now I have quarantine as an excuse.
To justify it.
Yeah,
I have
working from
quarantine
home,
as an
it's weird
excuse for
how
my
everybody else.
horrible life decisions.
Working from home so much, it's kind of weird that the rest of the world kind of gets on the same page as you, because you're always used to being out of step with everybody, and suddenly everybody's trapped at home and struggling to
Mhm.
do work from home and like stay sane and like have an appropriate sleep schedule and stuff, and suddenly realizing, oh shoot, social media is kind of a time sink. Oh shoot, I'm like super lonely and only see 2 people ever. Wow, this messes with my brain, and I'm sitting here watching everybody like react to this, and I'm like, oh, so that's why I dealt with depression for years.
I've only seen like 3 people in the past what, fucking 2 months, That would be Ashley, who is obviously my girlfriend and roommate, and also the guy at 7-Eleven that I constantly see when I go to 7-Eleven.
Love you, 7-Eleven
I'm
guy.
sure he's just as happy to see you.
Aw.
You're not a dick to him, so probably.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope I'm not a dick to him. He has a really thick accent, and I'm really bad at understanding thick accents. So I can't understand him a lot of the time, and I feel real bad.
Aw.
Because like he'll try to start a conversation, and
Aw.
I genuinely can't understand him, and I'm like yeah, and I feel real bad because I hate it when people do that to me, where they're just like yeah, uh-huh, and I literally have to do that to him because I don't know how else to respond. I don't know what he's saying, and I just feel so bad.
You're gonna have to learn. That's the only other person that you talk to. You're gonna have to just get
I
used
have
to
to
it.
learn his accent.
You have to learn. Consider it a mission. You're a voice actor. It's just part of your education.
The only time I really understand him is when he's like making fun of me for buying fucking like 5 donuts.
What type of accent does he have?
He's a very thick Indian man.
Okay. Yeah, we have those where we have a lot of Indian people by my 7-Eleven, and they actually have this Japanese place. It's a lot of multicultural foods over here by my 7-Eleven, and there's this
Oh,
Japanese
yum.
place, and I have never tried like authentic ramen, but their ramen it hits the spices. It's like that good type of spice. It's that
Oh
good
yeah.
type of burn, and
Oh yeah.
Good shit.
I just love it, and I am so sad that
I
it
had
is
I
closed.
I had some genuine ramen that was like real spicy a few months ago, and I literally fucking cried. I was like, "Oh my god, this is so fucking intense. I can't
miss
like
ramen.
it was
I
way too fucking spicy." I usually have a good spice tolerance, I think. I just didn't expect it to actually hit that hard.
Yeah, like
I have an insane spice tolerance. Oh
mine is
man,
horrible.
you guys are making me miss diners and stuff though. I mean, normally with everything that's been going on, I'd be like, yeah, let's go out and let's like go to a breakfast diner and go enjoy that in celebration. And now I'm like, can't do it. All I can
Guys,
do is
the
buy this gin.
last diner I went to was Denny's.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Honestly,
That was
Taco Bell and Denny's.
that was the
Denny's?
last place I went before the end of the world. Was Denny's diner.
You live in a place
So it
that
was
has
your
like
fault.
such good food too.
Yeah, and we went to
You
fucking Denny's. I'm a trash human being. I was just craving Denny's. Like I'm a garbage human being.
Honestly though, their breakfast menu, those pancakes, the Denny's by
That's
my
that's
place.
all I had. That's all I had when I went to Denny's last. Was I got just their stack of pancakes because it was like unlimited pancakes or whatever.
Their pancakes, they're pretty good.
So I got like 4 orders of pancakes. It was pretty cool.
Alrighty, everything's acquainted, everything's ready.
Yeah, I think
Let's.
Ash is going to be back on her. Ash, you're there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
muted
I
you.
just muted because my birds.
I'm gonna grab a
were
drink
were
real quick,
throwing
and then I'll be
a
good.
little hissy fit. So
Of course they are.
Yeah, so good. But yeah, once again, thank you all for being here. I truly appreciate it. This is a pleasure. This is an honor.
yeah, thank you for inviting us.
I'm always up for a fun conversation.
Oh yeah. I'm like really, really curious about like the production that you're doing. I've been really following the little the vlogs that you guys been doing,
Mhm.
the little easy devlog, and
Mhm.
what you're doing over there with the 3D and actually setting everything up with like a set. You're actually creating like a set using the 3D and using VR. I find that truly very curious on how that is actually being done and the steps being taken and how that actually works because I never seen anything like it. So I'm just really curious on how that's really being done.
Yeah. Well, that was that was a decision that I made very early on before all this started, before even the Kickstarter, I have been looking into how 3D maybe could be integrated into the general animation pipeline, because in my experience, sometimes when we're asked to do boards, when we're asked to animate over scenes, boards traditionally layout, when the scene is already planned out and like somebody has like etched out the entire scenery, that's usually supposed to be done by someone else. But over time in the business, the board artist has been taking on more and more layout responsibility during production, and that's kind of created this sort of a bottleneck, where in this aim to kind of like cut down on time and cost, you end up creating sometimes issues when you have the board artists have to make all these set decisions basically. One, it can complicate your view of the environment, like where to choose a good shot and stuff, because I feel like sometimes I would make more conservative decisions in terms of like where I would basically put the camera in the scene and follow the characters and all that, just to avoid having to do more layout work. Because there wasn't really time to sit there and like noodle a background forever. So you have to keep things like very, very staid, very, very conservative. Everybody has to be like on a flat plane and roughly on the same level and stuff. You can't get too creative with placement, because otherwise you have to design the set a whole lot more. And then on the other side, if you're in animation, if you're doing the animation part of the program, part of the pipeline, and the layout hasn't been properly figured out, there's no backgrounds finished or anything, it can be very difficult, because while you're animating, you have to keep in mind that comp means composition, is going to have to take your footage and composite it into the scenery later. And if your character isn't like really lined up with the background in specific ways, like let's say they have to like touch a pole, or like walk through some grass, or like walk behind or in front of things, it can get very difficult to figure out like how much of your animation is really like worth spending time on. If like, you have these, you have like this arm moving around, but it's actually going to be blocked or something like that. And I remember on the last production I was on, that was actually a big issue, where there was just so many unique backgrounds. And this was Midnight Gospel, back when I was doing some animation at Titmouse.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many unique backgrounds. I don't know if you've seen that show. It's on Netflix. It's really gorgeous, like just super lush environments. But there were so many environments, none of which were reused, that created this bottleneck during the production process, where background design always had to play catch up constantly to animation, which is not terribly ideal. And I realized as we were going into this and thinking about it, I was like, it'd be just very convenient if on a production, like you instead built the set first, you kind of did layout first, and if you could then give that set to the board artist before anything,
Just like
then you could.
real movies.
Yes. So just like in live action, where you have a set and then you're the cinematographer, you choose your shot, and you use, you work with the environment to find like interesting angles and all of that. If we could integrate that into the animation pipeline, but not just 3D animation. I mean, we're pretty familiar with that idea, but 2D animation, just what could be done if we said, okay, what if we started with a 3D set and then like went from there? Because there's nothing saying that you couldn't like then paint over that set. Like it doesn't have to be a pure 3D render. You don't have to treat it like a 3D environment where you have to like, walk through it like in a video game where every asset needs to be figured out from every angle. It's like, no, you could just treat it as like layout and then you paint over on top of it. But still, like the amount of flexibility in choosing your shots and basically having layout every time you pick your angle, is just really, really convenient. And then on top of that, a lot of what makes this possible is Blender.
Blender.
In 2019, they updated to 2.8 and they did a huge overhaul of their entire program. Like the user interface is a lot more user friendly. It's a lot more familiar to anybody who is has some even limited experience with 3D programs, whereas previously Blender was kind of its own beast. It was a little hard to parse if you were familiar with anything else, and it was very difficult to parse if you were unfamiliar with anything else. But I think it's a little bit more straightforward now. When I open up the program, I'm like, oh, okay, I see. You know, I can click this tab here to animate, and I can click this tab here to focus on just rendering. I can, you know, click through all these tabs to this side, and it's pretty clear how everything's organized. There's less searching around, but importantly, it's a very powerful piece of software that is free. So anybody can download it, and you can thus build a set inside of Blender, give it to any artist, and they can work with it, provided that their computer is like powerful enough. AKA, we have to make sure that the sets are low poly enough that anybody's computer can work off of that. But the idea is that we're not limited in terms of our scope by access to technology. The technology already exists at a very reasonable price point of free. And then in addition to that, Blender has invested a lot of time and energy into developing their grease pencil tool set inside of Blender, which is a 2D animation tool set. Now, we'll be animating in Toon Boom Harmony, which is a professional software, then you do have to pay for that. But to be able to block out certain shots using grease pencil by drawing in 2D inside of a 3D environment, that can make things much, much easier for composite later on, for layout in general, for the board artists if they just want to like experiment with like an element or whatever inside of a scene, and they don't have to like remember, okay, this you know this cup was there, I have to make sure that this angle is correct here, that kind of. It's like you just draw it in the scene and there it is. It's just it's there. In fact, you can draw a character inside of a car and then parent the grease pencil object, which this character drawing is attached to the car, have the car move, key that, and just, you know, point the camera at it. And instead of having to draw a car with the character inside of it, you know, for every panel that you need to describe the action, you just literally set it up and you've just blocked the action out that the animators later on can make use of directly. So that's the idea. And we have to figure out how to save some time and energy during this production process, like where we can, in order to make it a little bit easier down the line. So the idea is just like, how can we kind of speed things along like at the front in a way that like helps people down the line. And it is asking a lot of our barters to suddenly have to pick up some 3D tools, but thankfully with something like Blender, besides the fact that it's free, there's a lot of resources out there of just like tutorials on like how to use the camera, how to use grease pencil. Then we can discuss with each other about how to use that, and we all have access to each other. We can talk to Newt directly, for instance, our 3D modeler on the project. Be like, hey, how do I do this? Instead of just sitting there and going like, I don't know what's possible. I fucking give up. And that, like, all of that could make our production process a lot more smooth than if we had none of that and we had to be a lot more conservative with our shots, because, you know, it's, you know, it costs money every time you have a new background like that has to be painted. You know, that's something else that has to be painted in. But if like fully 3/4 of the work is finished because it's already textured, it's already lit in some ways, you know, the composition is solid, and then all someone has to do is go in and do like the handcrafted painting touch up, it could look really good. It looks handmade without like looking like weirdly blocky. And we can still get like some of that look that we see in Tracy's work in her comic. So if you've, you know, I'm sure everybody here's comic, at least by now. But Tracy does just this really good job of illustrating these backgrounds, and thankfully, like, her style of doing that works really well with this production process, because hers is a very illustrative but somewhat literal take on those environments, where most of the abstraction is in how things are rendered, not the actual structure of things. So it's not this weird warped environment where we have to accommodate like a strange geometry and that kind of thing. So we can create a pipeline that has more literal objects in there without it clashing too hard. If you look at the characters, the way they've been designed, they're much more animation friendly. And that's both with respect to the fact that if we were to actually render things the way that Tracy does in the comic, but in animation, this animation would take like 3 to 5 times longer. And we would probably have to have the same tool set as Klaus in order to do something anything close to that.
Yeah.
And we don't have access to that because that's proprietary technology. But besides that, we really like the look of the kind of like Xerox era, Dark Age Disney, scratchy line thing. It has a really like organic texture to it that's really appealing. That always like drew me to animations, like how you can look at the image and it feels like a drawing. Its drawingness is very, very apparent. It's not hiding that. And I've always wanted to do a project that took that look and played with that some more. And with this project, because there's such an emphasis on elements of nostalgia, we thought that would be pretty cool, like do that callback of with that the nostalgia one has for that dark age Disney, and sometimes also the subject matter that sort of like broached into. It felt right. It felt like a good marriage, especially since like a lot of what influenced Tracy herself, like often like, came from that era. Like, and both me and Tracy were very much influenced by a lot of that 80s animation, like you saw prior to like the Disney Renaissance period, which has some of my favorite movies. Mine, like Lion King, actually pushed me in animation. I was like 5 or 6 when I watched that, and I was like, I want to make animated movies because I saw that. But when I think of like some of the films that I enjoy on like a thematic level, like in terms of tone and stuff, that that would be like a lot of those the Better Bluth films and Disney from the era that I mentioned. So quick note on the cracks and clicks. Sorry about that. It's just some error that happens in my mic. Apologize for that.
It's all good. But the thing I noticed a lot, and what I was really curious about, is actually the sepia tones. And you talked about earlier how you really like the tonality and the aesthetic that Tracy brings to the comic. And I was just wondering, are you gonna bring that the tones, that the type of blur that really, like that 20s, 30s newspaper-y kind of look to the actual film, the short film that you're going to be doing? Or are you going to just keep it fully colored?
We're going to do probably a bit more saturated than what you would see in the first volume of the comic, closer to what the comic currently looks like in terms of tone.
Full color, but not fully saturated, so that it looks like a rainbow colored, kaleidoscope thing. It's a little bit understated, a little bit of film grain mixed in there. And I think we'll probably open with something a little more sepia tone and kind of fade in with the colors a bit. But yeah, the idea is to kind of capture a little bit of the comic so that it doesn't look quite. It still should look like a story that was told a while ago, and maybe not something so modern.
Yeah. And what I really like Fable, first of all, beautiful, great explanation. That was gorgeous, right? And what I really like about these projects, not just the Lackadaisy short film, but what we're seeing with Astartes, what we're seeing with the what was the other hotel one?
Has-Been Hotel?
Has-Been Hotel, yes, thank you. And what we're seeing with Pi Animations is that we're seeing a lot of people really starting to push through and really start creating their own stories with their own spin on things. Each one has their own style, has their own unique take on things, and it's all thanks to these open source platforms. Astartes, he wasn't using, I believe he was using Maya, but Pi Animation and Has-Been Hotel, they were using a lot of open source, and they're using collaborative efforts with a lot of people, and they're bringing out their own stories and their own ideas, and I really find that great with the new technologies that is being produced, and how you said that we're using Blender, and how Blender has a lot of open source and has a lot of materials that a lot of people are being able to grasp. And because of their newer version 2.8, I've actually started playing around with Blender, the classic donut tutorial. I'm pushing my way through that. I'm actually doing it with a friend, and he was able to make him coffee. And with Inkscape, they created a new one. It's like Illustrator, but free. Inkscape, they created a 2.0 version that is woefully so much better than what they currently had before with the 1.0. And I'm just starting to see a lot of these open source programs, along with individuals themselves, really push through to creating their own thing and to become better. And I love that, and I'm really happy that these things are being pushed out forward. And I love being a part of it. I love just seeing I would say, the steps being created, the background, how things are being made, and what you just said, how keeping things a little bit different from the comic, and being able to make sure that, first of all, it would be easier for you guys to be able to animate and create, but also keeping the same type of, a little bit of the same type of tone of people who are familiar with the comic, and people will be able to love it. And I also noticed with the script, are you going to be also making different changes to the script, making it much more adjustable for the film as well?
Yeah, the script is actually an entirely new thing because it would be impossible to adapt a small chunk of the books, and have all the characters that we wanted to present show up because in so many scenes, I mean, like Mordecai, Nicodeme, and Seraphine are pretty vital characters, but they don't interact with the rest of the Lackadaisy crew for much of the book. I think we're basically building up to that point still inside of the
They're
comic. Yeah.
Yeah, there are two different converging storylines that haven't quite fully converged yet.
Yeah.
But
So we decided to write a script, me and Tracy, that would kind of show everything off in kind of more condensed package. And it would be basically like the flavors of Lackadaisy, but in like a shorter form that would give you like about like 15 to 18 minutes of all the characters that we're like most familiar with and that we love best, and give them enough screen time and show like the comedy interacting with these characters, action that
it's
happens typically in the comic. So
it's an introduction of the premise, the setting, the conflicts, and the characters and their relationships, so that it hopefully presents kind of it tells its own little story. It's in a
mhm.
self-contained way, but it also presents the world as it is, and all of the potential it has for other stories that wind throughout it. So.
Yeah, you
Okay.
could. Yeah, kind of like if you've seen pilots before for shows and they're not like a literal first episode of it. If you watch a pilot for a show, it does the same thing where it's just trying to like condense kind of in general what happens to give people like an idea of like what they could expect if there was an entire show around this. So we had to write the script to make that happen, but if this were to become a TV show, then you'd see the books themselves actually get adapted.
Okay, so you're basically writing it just to be able to fit the current narrative that you're trying to displace, instead of trying to envelop all things that were occurring around the comic. All right, that makes
Yeah,
sense. That makes sense.
yeah,
Being able
yeah,
to just simplify and streamline things for
yeah.
product.
It yeah, especially because like I mean, to get the full scope of part of the books, like you might spend like 10 minutes on just a scene that involves only like two characters from the book because like why would you rush through that? Like that would kind of spoil the pacing that happens. So it's easier to just write something new that fits within the space that you need it to rather than trying to um cut up parts of the book and make and like rework that to make it like work. That said, in the short, there are elements that do appear in the books, and might even appear later on without like spoiling what. So it's not as if it's not in some ways intersects with canon. You know, it's like all of what's happening is very much in character to what all these personalities, what they do and how they bounce off of one another.
Okay. And another thing is that Non, he actually typed in the Discord group call. For those who can't see it, I'll just read it out. As an example of direct application of superimposed 3D, drawing numerous frames of hard geometry like vehicles has always been a beast to tackle for animators. So as you can see here, our assets like vehicles, weapons, handle props, etc. are being fitted and rigged to be inserted into a scene and only minimally repainted. And that makes 100% sense. I could just imagine trying to draw geometric shapes for each and every single frame. You know, I'm an amateur artist, and
Yeah, I mean,
just
animators, we can do it. It's just that it takes more time than if you could just like put together a shader that could at least take care of most of the work for you. So that's kind of the intention. So that's going to be a lot of our exploration process, is seeing how much we can have the 3D programs doing the heavy lifting before we go in and hand touch up stuff.
okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But you know, speaking of, like, you were talking a lot about, like, you know, software that's, you know, open source or free that people have access to, and that stuff is really wonderful for
Yep.
teaching people how to do digital art and sharing it more easily than before. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with how much Photoshop alone used to cost like 10 years ago, but it was prohibitively expensive, and you couldn't update it that often, even just to keep up with the Joneses. Like, you would basically have to be a professional artist in order to afford it. And, you know, which means also that you would have had to have like parents before you were able to be a professional artist who could afford it. You would have had to have parents who were willing to put down money for that kind of thing. This is assuming you didn't pirate it, which, you know, a lot of us did. um, but now you know, you don't even have to pirate software anymore to get some really good software for like very, very inexpensive. Like Clip Studio Pro is an amazing piece of software, and the professional version of the program costs under $150 when you get it on their like discounts, which are like happen like 2 or 3 times a year. They have this really sharp like 50% discount on it. And then the basic version is actually extremely inexpensive, being $40 only when they're doing the extreme discount. And it's plenty powerful enough that you don't have to upgrade if you don't need like just a handful of other features, which most people don't. And that has an animation suite tied to it now too. But beyond software, I think one of the big things that makes this possible is actually all the collaboration software that you have. So we have Discord, our studio that we're building basically to make this short happen. Our crew, we confer over Discord actually, and we've done voice recording sessions over Discord, even where our voice actors, rather than recording lines and then emailing it back to us and then we give feedback and then they do another record, we can instead do a live record where they are recording as we're giving them real-time feedback on their performance, and they can do quite a few takes in a short period of time and get something much more nuanced than if we were doing it like the typical way where you just like email each other back and forth. In addition, our crew gets to see everybody else's input into the project so they can contextualize their work against everybody else's, so that you're not just feeling like you're doing some artwork and where's it going or what is its purpose, because you're only talking to like the director and like the PA or whatever. You actually can see everybody else's work. So it feels more like an actual virtual workspace rather than the usual experience of being a freelance artist, where it's very lonely. You know, you only talk to like a couple of people. You never talk to the rest of the crew. This is when you're working from home. Uh, Working in a studio feels like a joy because you can talk to other people and like kind of understand, like, oh, this is what this is for, and, you know, get some bounce off of other people and that kind of thing. And to take a little bit of that and put it into a virtual space, it you know, it makes for a better product. And Hasbin Hotel, they actually have a project server as well where they would confer while they were working. And I know on other projects I've been on, including ones I've set up prior, we set up servers and we would communicate in order to make sure that the work we were doing was synced up. Actually, I'm on a project with Mike's partner right now on a project called Hell Puppy, and Ashley, his partner, set up that server, and that's been really cool to just see like how someone else is doing it as well, because that informs then what can I improve on our end. So it's I think just having that collaboration software that matters a lot, more so maybe even than the art tools, because you can make some amazing art with some really primitive tools. Like I could sit here and I could make like something pretty cool looking off of like free apps that you get off of your phone and make some stop motion whatever, and maybe it wouldn't be like the most glorious thing ever, but it doesn't need to be entertaining. But to be able to collaborate with other people real time and organize that conversation, so it's not just like one big Skype chat room where everybody's talking over one another. It's so you can organize it and see like here's the character design team and like what they're doing over here, and here's the board team and what they're doing over here, and here you can see the 3D models as they're being built, and people can talk to one another directly and be like, hey, these are my needs for my part of the project, or I'm missing this file, do you know where this is? And all that can make things go a lot more smoothly, because there's so many hiccups that happen during production and you have to kind of get ahead of all those. So having people being able to just talk to each other, though, that can smooth over a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And what I really, really liked about the whole this whole explanation is that the voice actors, the animators, and everybody, they don't have to be within a studio. They could be within a digital studio and be able to collaborate and be able to discuss the product and be able to actually record their voice lines and send feedback at real time instead of having to, as you say, just email each other, which would take a lot longer. But being able to truly discuss and say, oh, can you take that back? I really need much more. I need that more Rocky in you. I need that. I need more Gremlin. Like I really.
Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, especially with Rocky, with the poetry section on the animatic that we revealed for the Kickstarter. But that was just a small part of the total of some of the project. But that poem was just such an intense piece of that was a very intense session, because we had to go through and like line by line figure out what to stress on each of that, and like Mike did so many takes. He was a trooper.
Yeah, we spent like I think over an hour on like just figuring everything out. And maybe 2 hours. I can't remember. It was a long time though. We spent a good deal of time just figuring out the poem, what every line meant, the rhythm of it, the how it's supposed to like be spoken, like what rhythm, what inflections to use, like where to go up and down in pitch on what word. Just a lot of science to that poem.
Yeah, I
And
mean, we were even describing to you, like, imagine that you're actually talking to someone on the street and he's kind of an old friend, but you're ribbing him, but actually he's a river. But
yeah.
actually you're talking about the girl you like.
Yeah,
Things like
so
that,
there
yeah.
are a lot of different nuances in that poem that required a good deal of attention. So I think so. We did record some dialogue, everything that was in the trailer and whatnot, and I think the dialogue got done in like 10 to 15 minutes.
It was so
Whereas the
much
poem,
faster.
yeah,
It
the
was,
dialogue was
yeah.
finished in like 10 to 15 minutes, whereas the poem was like an hour and a half.
I'd say
So
it was longer, because we initially had one session where you just recorded it generally, like we did it initially in the more typical way that freelance voice actors work, where they don't always go into a studio, they'll just record from their space.
yeah, I just recorded
And
separately a few times too, just trying
yeah,
to kind of get the feel for the poem before we did an actual like record in a
yeah,
call.
and that was good also, because I mean we got to figure out basically what didn't work, which is just as important as hitting the right notes. But on top of that, while we were doing the live session, we had the script in front of Mike, and it's just a Google Doc. And I was actually updating the script to include notes on like what to emphasize and stuff after a couple read throughs, just so that we could remember like what notes that we had given him to maintain consistency on like a.
Because when there's so many notes,
Yeah.
we all tend to just kind of forget. We're like, what was that note again? Ah, shit, I
Yeah,
forgot.
you get tired
Fuck.
after a while. So, But yeah, I mean, we had a live document where we could communicate the needs and making sure that the notation that we used was something that Mike could readily understand. So
Because
all
I'm the
that's very
big
helpful.
dumb. I'm the big dumb, and I don't understand the
Oh.
big words that Rocky
Oh,
says.
you're selling
So-
yourself short. But it's true. When we have fan chat sessions where Mike hops in and people are asking Mike to just riff something that Rocco would say, and Rocky
Rocco.
like Rocky,
Rocco?
damn it,
Rocco's modern
you know,
world.
Ricky, whatever,
Jeez.
that guy, Mr. Eyebrows. So we would have some fans would ask Mike to riff on some Rocky and like do some more like Rocky is a very Shakespearean, like theatrical kind of guy. He just like inhales words, and so his vocabulary is actually a bit broader than Mike's. And poor Mike is like a deer in the headlights. He's like, please don't make me.
I'm like, I only know how to make like dumb internet, modern dumb jokes. So
Mike
I'm
can
just
give you
wa-
a 2020
so
Rocky.
I'll just oversimplify the
Yeah.
character for those kinds of
No,
things.
see,
Yeah.
you
They
just
do
need
this,
to have
they love-
need to have like a book of Shakespeare nearby, so you can just grab it and be like, ah, yes, this is what.
I
Rocky-"
remember in high school. In high school, I had a teacher I liked a lot. I can't remember his name, but he was a cool teacher. And I was like, I'm gonna impress him. I'm gonna buy this entire book of Shakespeare and read it in class. I bought a huge Shakespeare book. I never touched it. I just got it, brought it to class, and I never touched it.
Aw.
So
Aw.
so I've owned some Shakespeare literature. I've just never actually looked at it.
You're gonna have to start ingesting it now. I think a Midsummer.
I'm gonna have to get it back from Ohio at some point.
Yeah.
Any of
man.
those impassioned soliloquies delivered with way more gusto than they were intended to be delivered with would be good for Rocky. But they do that to all the voice actors. They wanted Jason to talk in Slovakian, and they wanted Sungwon to speak in Yiddish and everything. So
Oh, I remember the one call where they wanted Sun Wan to say a lot of Pickle Rick memes. That was
Oh
fun.
God.
Oh my gosh.
To be fair, I encouraged that. The most recent page of like, I mean, all you gotta do is replace those text bubbles, and there you go. It's so good. But I mean,
Meanwhile,
bring-
I'm just asked to read menu items.
Oh. So-
Digital studios though are really cool.
I don't know if we go even further down the rabbit hole, Michael. I believe someone was still asking you and Sungwon both to do the godforsaken bulgy thing.
No,
Oh, God.
no.
Hey, I'd already done enough of that as Angel Dust. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think Rocky needs to be spared.
Poor
Well,
Rocky.
you don't spare Rocky. You have to mess it up in a unique way. See, Angel Dust plays it straight, but Rocky would just ruin it somehow.
Yeah, I only did it as Angel because that's Ashley Nichols, the creator of Hell Puppy and my girlfriend, and also artist on Has Been and whatnot. Is because that's like her favorite song, her favorite like meme that's on the internet, and so she kind of forced my hand. I had no choice but to do that meme.
I mean, you say that, but then Ashley said to me that you did one take and then you didn't like it, so you perfected the take.
Yeah, I did it
Just
live on a
one ass
stream.
take.
I
Yeah.
did it live on a stream, and the take was really half-assed because I didn't know the song. And then like people started making animations, and I'm like, wow, my read really sucks. It needs to be better. And so I just did an actual take that was, recorded on my professional microphone and everything, and whatnot.
Yeah, I don't know what the Rocky version of that would be. More theatrical, I suppose, where he was trying to read it off as if it was just straight
Yeah.
poetry.
Just kind of read it as a
Yeah.
poem, not a song.
Yeah. Not really understanding any of it.
Oh, and it would need to be
Throwing in like
it would need to be translated from like cutesy furry speak. It would need to be translated from that to like super Shakespearean, like old timey, really sophisticated word.
Convert
Oh
to
my
the
God.
pentameter.
Please let me write that and force you to record it.
If you would like
That
to write
sounds
it,
majestic.
Well, you guys already
you would be
corrupted
smarter than
our
I.
assets enough with that, like caramel dancing Rocky and
Oh god.
the
The
Lackadaisy.
abominations. The
Yeah, I
I
don't.
will. I am not apologizing.
Newt just asked me to do that. I'm like, I'm gonna butcher it. I don't know the song's lyrics. I don't
No,
understand the
neither
language.
would Rocky, so it's fine. But that made me crack up. I was like, "What did you do?
And
I gave you
Newt,
this model, and you did what with it?"
Newt also told me that it didn't have to be good quality. So I'm like, okay, I'll just record on the headset mic, which I'm using right now. I'm like, I'll just use a headset mic, whatever.
I
No, it made it
specifically
better.
asked him to be as bad as possible.
Yes,
Oh my god.
but
That
it
is
sounded.
wonderful.
And that I was as bad as possible.
Oh my God. And like, it took me forever to just record my simple little lines because there's a cricket in my room. And like, by the time I was able to record, it was nighttime, and that cricket just goes and goes and goes until I think like 2 or 3 in the morning. So I was like, no, I want to give a clean read. But finally I gave up and I was like, I think the cricket is in here, but who cares?
Mm.
That is
My
a
dog is
pesky
whooping
little
real
animal.
hard. Yeah, I wanted to circle back around actually from our assets discussion and loop Kilo into the mix actually because she's one of our board artists and she's actually handling the whole sequence where we have so it was mentioned in the Kickstarter that we have the band Sepia Tonic doing some original music for the production and Ashley's section of the script is the one that features Sepia Tonic. So she's been basically playing Olive Branch, which is the name of the song, on a loop while she's working.
Oh my.
Yes, it's stuck in my head now. It's just always on. Um, and I mean, it's fun because like listening to the musical, what, I don't know how to describe it. Like just inflections and stuff is like, oh, this would be a good spot for this to happen in the sequence. Um, and and then uh trying to coordinate that with, oh, like I'm having to draw all these cars for this. Um, and so having the assets is definitely kind of like a godsend in in this case because otherwise it'd be taking me it'd take forever to be able to just, you know, figure out how these objects are in relation to each other.
Yeah,
And
they have such odd dimensions compared to modern cars. Also,
yeah.
Yeah, the
yeah.
historical nature of things adds some extra complicating factors because the cars don't quite work the same way. Like the rear doors in like a sedan open the opposite direction that they do in a modern vehicle, and so all these things we had to um, pull up references and everything. But the models kind of like encapsulate all of that, so they're super useful to have.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like a Ford Model T with
Model
suicide
T, Model
doors.
A, yeah,
Ford Model T with suicide doors. That sounds
yeah.
We had like discussions. There's so many vehicles where we had discussions about wait, how do you start this, and can they actually do they have to turn the wrench now, or is it electric start? And
Right.
we had this whole discussion
The
about the excavator.
Oh yeah, the fact
Yeah,
that so these cars at the time had electric ignitions, but they also had a crank start. And then there's the trunk, which is a literal trunk that's like strapped to the back of the vehicle.
yeah.
Um,
It was really funny to have so much of our crew
and
go.
then
Wait,
yeah,
so that's why they call it a trunk?
we
Because
had to
literally someone just bolted a trunk to the outside of the
Oh
car,
my
and that's
god.
how people just carried stuff around originally.
right.
Yeah.
I won't go into much detail about it because I don't want to give everything away, but we had to do a lot of research about like steam shovel excavators and like what the technology was like at the time. They happened to have both like a lot of the stuff that they were using to like dig quarries and do things like build the Panama Canal were still steam operated in the early 20th century, and it wasn't until about the 30s or 40s also had electrical ones, which ended up being important for us. But yeah, there's just all kinds of research that has to go into into this stuff. And if we can
Yeah.
condense it
And the-
down into one
yeah.
3D model and not have to give an entire history lesson to all of the board artists and all of the animators, then that just makes our life so much easier.
Yeah, like it just the silliest things where you go, wait a second, what did outdoor lighting look like? And like that's a question that leads you down an hour-long
And
rabbit hole.
you might
And
think
you
you
know,
know, but
yeah,
you find you're wrong. As soon as you start researching, you're like, oh yeah, if I had just
so
drawn what I
much.
thought it would have been, then
What does a telephone booth look like? And then you have to ask yourself, wait, did they have telephone booths?
they did, and they were indoors. They weren't like
Yeah.
the same kind of like you might in a noir film from the 40s or 50s, you
Mm.
might see like one of those metal telephone booths outside, but in the 20s they had like wooden ones. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
we
whole
try
different.
not to compromise on historical accuracy as much as we can.
Yeah, you have to fudge it in some places. You just can't. You can't be 100% accurate all the time without going way out of your way to do it, and that interferes a lot with storytelling. So you do
Yeah.
have to make some use artistic license in some places, but we try not to go too far with it. We try to keep it within the realm, you know.
And we're fortunate that Tracy's already done like a lot of that background research, so that even when we're sitting there and asking these questions and we're trying to do research, sometimes Tracy just knows because she's been collecting info for like a decade. Just
I've gone
living
down
in the
Oh,
20s.
so many rabbit holes of information, like oblique information from the 1920s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's
but
the
we try not to, in terms of the environment, at least, not venture too far. Not to venture outside the 20s.
yeah.
But in
It should
terms
look
of
like
our influences, we certainly do venture outside the 20s. Like a lot of the cinematography. When I'm giving notes to the board artists, I'm like, look into Fritz Lang, look into car chases from the 60s and 70s. You know, check out how they use the camera over here and this show that came out just recently, things like that. Where we're trying to go for a certain feel that feels nostalgic, but a lot of like what established our sense of like nostalgic um, uh, filmmaking was established slightly post 20s. So you can't actually go to the 20s because there was still a lot of some of it was still a bit primitive, a lot more advanced than you'd think, but you know, sound tech was only just starting to become like more common where you know, so a lot of our storytelling nowadays is so informed by sound that if you were to go like pure something that was very, very reminiscent of what was common at the time in the 1920s in terms of filmmaking, then you kind of be like working with like your hand tied behind your back and
We'd be
also
hinting
legs
this,
strapped, you know, to an anchor, you know, and it would just be very difficult.
yeah.
But
of
that
course
said, those limitations actually can be very informative. So, like I'm telling the board, don't do like Michael Bay 360 spins through the environment. We would have to paint all that. We would have to do like a lot more work on the background for that. But B, honestly, we don't need it. Like if you look at the way they chose their shots, you know, it was always a very human level scale, like where the camera was placed. You would have to get like a camera to actually physically go up there.
it had to be because that's all they could. That's all they had to work.
Yeah. So that
Yeah, that
limitation keeps us from going too insane.
um
Mhm.
what was it? Oh, I remember them talking about this with like Pacific Rim and how they made the digital, not real cameras, work like real like cameras in order to have that feeling of actually being there. Because when you have a camera that's just kind of floating all willy nilly, it kind of takes you out of that moment.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, having that restriction of, keep your shots just what a actual camera can be is actually pretty good for the overall just feel of the scene because that's not because it grounds you in reality. It's not taking you that way you can focus on like the emotion and what's going on rather than
Right.
this feels weird.
Yeah,
Get
you don't have to
distracted
worry
by
about coming up with a cool shot. It's like just, you know,
it's like
pick good staging.
the emotional distance between something like Pacific Rim that did have some emotional weight and like Transformers that was just,
Yeah,
visual joy.
it's like there's just so many animated films in particular, and it's more common now that animation is just used so much more in even live action production, where so many shots in superhero films are actually basically just animated cartoons with like actor faces just like slapped on top of it. But they can do whatever they want with the camera, and sometimes the lack of restriction actually takes away some of the impact, because you're never yourself going to physically float around the environment and as like a free form camera like 20 feet off the ground and able to do loop-de-loops and stuff. And
I
that can be
wish I
really cool
was.
for certain shots. I've seen like a lot of really cool shots done with drones and stuff using that. But what makes a scene feel intimate is if it feels like you are there, like the camera is you, that's your perspective standing there. And the closer the camera is to like what a human perspective is, I think like the better job it can do at making you feel a part of the scene, like with the characters. And the more you can like emphasize like that level of intimacy, the better it is. And by focusing on that, you can make for some very interesting staging. So yeah.
Oh, okay. So being able to keep everything grounded is keeping and maintaining the cinema of the normal, like normal cinematography, but also being able to express things in a unique way, being able to still use those 3D assets, but not going like crazy willy nilly or anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
you don't have to. It's like it's just because you have these tools doesn't mean you have to go crazy. Otherwise it's going to come off like a tech demo, which can be really cool. And in fact, a lot of early animation is really little more than a tech demo often. You saw some incredible stuff being done by like Disney and Fleischer and stuff, where they would do rotoscoping, and it would just be basically a tech demo of check out this cool thing we could do, even before they thought of a story to attach to that. But we're not interested in being a tech demo. We're not really being revolutionary. We're trying to like call back to things that we thought would just like stitch together really well.
Mm.
And by giving yourself kind of guidelines with which to work, it's just easier to avoid uh, getting stuck on like, but is this a cool shot? Is this a cool shot? And it's like, no, is this a shot that works within the guidelines where it's meant to feel very personal or to feel very intense, and it has a nice knock-on effect also of kind of cutting down on some of the workload, because if you're just focused on good staging and you're not focused on like making the camera move around in like wacky ways, and you're just choosing one shot to just stick the camera and stick it at the characters, then you don't have to worry so much about how many frames of background that you have to paint in order to animate that. You just have one still background, just have like a solid matte painting, and composite it thusly. So those limitations can work in your favor, which means that then you can invest more time and money into the animation, where we're trying to sell the acting of these characters, and we would really like to get the way that they move to feel very naturalistic and interesting. Like when you watch Klaus, like how interesting it is to see these characters move in like the little micro motions within each pose, where they don't feel like they're just like these broad arcs and whatever, where they're just like flowing from pose to pose or snapping to pose in order to illustrate every point. Instead, like they feel like they're talking and they're like trying to express themselves, and they're thinking through what they're saying. And that calls back to a lot of what I like in other animated features. Like I really like Spider-Verse did a great job of doing the same thing, where like that animation, like the characters felt like they were like thinking and working through the line, not just every time they moved it was punctuating the line. Like I know a lot of people really love the way that modern Disney is doing their thing, but one of the minor frustrations that I have as a performer is that sometimes I feel like when I watch more recent Disney animated fare stuff that's been made in the past like 15 years in particular, sometimes it feels like each line they're just trying to get into the broad pose, like the broad action of something, and have each beat emphasized rather than them necessarily like feeling that line. And I wouldn't apply that to literally everything that's been made in the past 15 years. I mean, I just cited like Spider-Verse as being like an incredible piece of animation. I think The Incredibles did a great job with having this very nuanced animation. but so often, like I'll watch a lot of modern animated films, and they just kind of feel, everybody feels like they move very much the same, like how they land on each line, so that when you do occasionally get to those points in a film where, like, even though it's mostly animated that way, but those few points, those few scenes where it is a little bit more nuanced, it's always just like a treat. It's a treasure to me. So that was one reason why I was so excited when Spider-Verse came out and Klaus came out, because it was more like what I gravitate towards as an animator, which is maybe more old school, but I don't think I'm exceptional at all in my preferences. There's quite a few people who feel that way, where they look at, um, for instance, like if you watch 101 Dalmatians and how those characters move, like they have like a certain level of nuance to them that's always like really interesting to watch. It's you could just mute the entire scene, not listen to a thing, and just watch it, and it's interesting to watch. Um, sometimes so we really have yet to get there all the way with TV animation, because just the time and budget makes it really difficult to invest that much in having really nuanced animation. And there's obviously exceptions, like you can see a lot of really great animation coming out of Japan and Korea, for example. Um, and even some American productions, like you'll see some really amazing animation. I mean, Avatar: The Last Airbender, fucking awesome,
Phenomenal.
so good. Um, and but a lot of those, I mean, they're also like Japanese or Korean collaborations, so clearly I
Japanese,
think a lot of,
they're doing something right.
yeah, and they, a lot of those folks have figured out how in their production pipeline to sometimes emphasize the animation in certain ways so that it stands out more, and like where to save money so that you could put more emphasis on the scenes that you need to, so you can get those cool, what's it called, sakuga shot, you know all those cool shots in My Hero Academia that everybody drools over, like, would not
Yes.
be possible without also considering how in the rest of the production pipeline, how to divvy up your resources so that you could do really cool things like that. And that's part of the idea of what we're doing with this, is like, how can we divvy up our resources so that we can give more attention to the things that we feel are very important, for instance, the physical acting of these characters, because we want to have really strong animation, as strong as we can possibly get with the time and the money and the crew that we'll be assembling. So whatever we can do to make that happen, is like, that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Wow,
Mhm.
man, that is phenomenal. I just want to say thank you all for being here, for participating, just for existing and doing this project. It, I am looking forward to it. I'm sure a lot of our members are looking forward to it too. If you want to support the Lackadaisy production, I'll be putting down their PayPal and their Kickstarter below. If you want to see their devlog, I'll put that in the description below also. If you want to join their Discord server, if you want to just be involved, I'll be giving all the information for you guys to be able to do so. Once again, thank you, Lackadaisy crew, for being here and doing this for us. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for
But
having us.
thank you
Yes.
for
Yeah.
having us. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Alrighty.